Family Foundation. I'm the president, and we're thrilled to have you here today. Thank you so much for joining us. We're trying to kick off something new today, so hopefully it'll be of interest to folks. Certainly a lot of folks interested on the initial one. We'll have over 100 folks on this call. Our goal is just simply to provide some extra conversation while we're all able to have a little more time on our hands, able to get together digitally, to really provide some ability for us to just dig into some of the issues at hand with someone that can help partner with us on some information and share their unique perspective. So this is our first one, so everyone's going to need to bear with us. I'll give a couple parameters right from the outset, just so that everybody knows how this works. Our goal is to keep everyone on mute, so you are automatically being muted by our administrator. We really need that because it cuts down on the background noise. So if you're muted, we will continue to keep everyone muted except for the speaker. But at the end, we will have a time for Q&A, but that will be done initially through the chat box. So we can't have everybody jumping in verbally. So if you have a question, you can place that question in the chat box, and you'll be basically called on. That question will be read, and Delegate Rock will have some time to answer it. So that's kind of functionally how we're going to go. It's great to see smiling faces, so feel free to keep your screens on, just don't keep your sound on. Those are two different buttons, so you can't have one without the other if you're not familiar with different platforms for these webinars. I'm going to open us in prayer, tell you a little bit about what the Family Foundation has got going on right now, and then we'll turn it over to Delegate LaRock. So I'm going to open us with a word of prayer. Lord God, we are grateful for this time together. We are grateful that we serve a mighty God, even in difficult moments. Lord, we know that you are in charge, regardless of the circumstances we feel and see around us. We pray for our first responders who are the medical community right now. Lord, we just pray that you would, Lord, just protect them. Give them healing hands. And Lord, we just pray that through this pandemic, your glory would be revealed. Be with us in this conversation. Give us insights and wisdom as we look to better our Commonwealth and help flourishing families across Virginia. We just pray all these things in the name of Jesus. Amen.
Yeah.
Well, what I'm going to do is just simply keep you updated on just a couple things going on at the Family Foundation. Obviously, the best way for you to stay tuned into that are things like being signed up on our email alert list that you can get right on our website at familyfoundation.org. That's always the best way, but we also have a blog there. Not everything that goes out by email that the email doesn't include everything. So a lot of times there's articles on the blog are also a great way to stay tuned in. That's right on the front of our website as well. Just a couple things, if you're not paying tight attention, there's a lot of folks trying to take advantage of the crisis moment that we're in, and the Family Foundation is trying to stay on top of that. And specifically, the biggest sort of player we see trying to take advantage of the moment is the abortion industry. No surprise there. Governor Northam called them out as an exception to the rule, saying that we can have no elective surgery except abortion. And our Attorney General Herring has been hard at work trying to get the federal government to overturn some parameters, so essentially you can get an abortion pill mailed to you while you're sitting on your couch. So pretty alarming stuff. We're on it. But that is definitely a unique moment. We're also monitoring instances where pro-lifers are not being treated with equal treatment as the abortion industry. So we actually have pro-lifers praying outside clinics across Virginia, or in some cases having mobile ultrasound units. We had quite an interesting incident in Virginia Beach just the other day where ultrasound unit was outside an abortion clinic, and it was cited as not being as violating the governor's order, yet there weren't more than 10 people. They were distant, and they are part of the abortion process. Our law still requires an ultrasound until July 1. So if you can allow abortion, you can allow people to save lives. So Family Foundation's kind of digging into all these specifically unique moments that this COVID pandemic has created. So we just wanted to let you know that we are zoned in and kind of on top of that watchdog role of what is the government doing and how our industries like the abortion industry taking advantage of the moment. So just wanted to share that with you. And again, easiest way to stay tuned in is definitely the email alerts and the website. But now what I want to do is just by way of introduction, thank Delegate LaRock for being here. Delegate LaRock for us has been really just such a champion for our issues. There are many in the General Assembly who still provide great votes on critical issues. We may not have a majority, but we do still have many who are voting well, but there are few that are standing well. I'm sad to say that, but there are very few that are actually willing to say the hard things that need to be said in the moment, needing to speak out, make the arguments for our side of issues, and Delegate LaRock has been one of those. So just by way of introduction, Delegate LaRock, just give us a minute on how you're doing in quarantine, what's filling your time, how you're doing with the COVID situation yourself.
Well, glad to do that, Victoria. Thanks for having me here, and thanks for that very gracious introduction. And I will say that what I can accomplish, or what I can speak out when I do speak out, it's usually with the help of the great work that the Family Foundation does in digging down into the many bills that affect families and have a distinct moral component to them, and really helping others understand those. And that's really necessary when there's so much going on in a busy General Assembly session. You guys really provide a crucial service. So thanks for that. And thanks for being on top of this this situation we're in. What I do with my time is I do a little bit of essential work on the job where I usually work, and have been putting a fair amount of my focus on things relating to budget, and trying to organize some people to encourage the governor to really make some of the difficult decisions. It's a sign of a true leader when they'll recognize a crisis ahead of time and be willing to do things that sometimes aren't really all that popular. So all of that stuff takes up some time, trying to compose messages and interact with the people involved. But I think we're seeing some good results. And so thanks for the opportunity to maybe talk about that in a little more detail as we go through the call here.
Wonderful. Let me just take a moment. I'm going to basically turn this call over to Todd Gackey, who is our Director of Legislative Affairs, and he's really the one that kind of helps lead with Josh Hetzler, both our lobbying efforts in the General Assembly. And so I'm going to let Todd kind of walk through some of the questions we have for you and help through the Q&A, and I'll just kind of turn it over from here. Thanks, Todd.
Great. Well, thank you. And thank you, Delegate LaRock. I'm not going to go through everything that Victoria has already said, because she did really describe very well how important you've been on many of these issues. Going forward, I think what in this session, what we really want to look at is some of the bills that are before the governor and some of the current issues kind of couched in this whole COVID-19 situation we find ourselves in, and just kind of talk about this to give people a sense of maybe some concerns, maybe things that we can do to bring some relief to families as we move forward. But before we really get into that, I really wanted to just start with some icebreakers, because this was a very chaotic and contentious session. So I thought it might be good for some folks to just hear maybe some lighthearted moments or moments of collegiality that can kind of let them know, hey, look, there are moments within this General Assembly session where maybe they work together, or there was just a moment of brevity, of just lightheartedness. I don't know if you have any that you could share with everyone.
Yeah, you're right. There wasn't a lot of lightheartedness or collegiality in this session, but those moments are there. I think the real laugh that usually happens in some form or another in each session is when a delegate is called preparing to speak to their bill, where they have to give an explanation, and so the focus goes on that person, and they stand up and describe the wrong bill, and maybe everyone else in the room realizes that, and they let them go on until somebody just kind of nudges them and says, you're talking about the wrong bill. And that's always good for a laugh. Collegiality, a couple things come to mind, and just I'll be very brief, but the partisan divide is pretty deep at most of the times. But I had a bill that it wasn't my banner bill for the session, but all bills that you put time into are important. And one of them had kind of gotten bumped a couple times and had not made it before a courts committee. And the majority leader, who's also, I think, a ranking member of the courts committee, Charnel Herring, made it clear to me that it was important to her that my bill was given a hearing. And that really struck me because that's a sign, I think, of a true leader that cares about not just bills that are of Democrat interest to one party or the other, in this case, Democrats. She cared that my bill was given a hearing, and that really seemed like a small thing, and I told her I appreciated that, and it was a good moment. So there's some others, but I think some of their leaders really are just as narrow-minded as can be, but there are some folks on the other side that I really have come to respect more, even in this very difficult session that we went through.
Great. Well, if you could, here's one last icebreaker. That was a great summary there. What is one positive takeaway? You know, it could be legislatively, it could be procedural or something. What is one positive takeaway that you had coming away from the 2020 session?
Well, it would be hard to divide between two, so I'll be very brief. I mean, the expectation going into the session was extremely intense, focusing on Second Amendment. The lobby day, which is typically a very busy day, was just unbelievably outpouring of citizens becoming involved in the government. So that's one that I'll remember for a long time. It reminded me of March for Life, when people converge on Washington. You know, after decades of Roe v. Wade, they still come to stand up for what's right. But the other one that was really, really striking was that the folks that a year ago, a lot of Republicans and Democrats both supported this constitutional amendment to have a bipartisan, a nonpartisan redistricting commission, which I think in everybody's estimation would make redistricting that will take place soon more fair. And so it has to be passed twice in the form of a resolution and then sent to the ballot. So there was very intense pressure for a lot of the Democrats who had supported it in the 2019 session to flip their vote now that the Democrats have taken power, and to vote differently on that, to not support it. But it is a huge credit, and it amazed me that the Democrats, I think there were 7 or 8 that hung in there, voted to pass that along with Republicans and send that to the voters in November. That was a moment, honestly, you know, sounds like a lack of faith, but I wasn't sure we were going to see that come out of the General Assembly because it was so hotly contested. So partly thanks to groups around the state, including, well, I don't need to name names, but it was a great effort, and I think we'll benefit from that by having redistricting take place, and if the voters put it on pass it when it's on the referendum. So that was a moment. It really surprised me.
Okay. Yeah, we watched that unfold, and I think we have the same sentiments that you have. Well, let's kind of dive into some of these bills and we're looking at bills that are going to impact businesses and families. And there are a number of them. You're looking at, you know, transportation bills, some that are dealing with clean energy, minimum wage. You know, can you kind of just walk through maybe just a few of them to give everyone a sense of what's before the governor now and what that impact is going to be for businesses and for families?
Yeah, well, as most people understand, bills are voted out of the legislature and then sent to the governor. And he has a period of time to react to them. He can sign them, and he's signed a lot of pieces of legislation. He can propose amendments, which then go back to the legislature, and that will be coming up on the 22nd. And we vote up and down. I think a vote of 51 supports or rejects a governor's amendment, and then he does likewise with the budget, which is another bill. And you know, no doubt he will be making some pretty significant amendments to the budget. How deep the cuts will go remains to be seen, but that's the process, and that's the focus, as I had mentioned earlier, that I've been paying a lot of attention to and trying to encourage people to realize just how important it is that the governor takes this as seriously as he needs to um, keep us on the right course. The bills that many of them that passed, and there were a lot, um, reflected the values and the priorities of the majority party, the Democrats, and many of them shifted the balance of doing business and the cost of living in Virginia and moved it, from my perspective, in the wrong direction, meaning the things that would raise the cost of, well, minimum wage is a good example. We need protections for workers, but raising the minimum wage imposes a burden on employers, many of which are struggling just to stay in business, as we all know, under the restrictions imposed by the governor. Different miscellaneous taxes, I guess the transportation bill, which carries big tax increases on gas, that will pass into law if the governor doesn't amend it and the legislature act favorably on an amendment. And then just more general, these the Virginia Clean Economy Act, that's one that all sorts of costs, including the ones that will raise the cost of electricity, commit vast amount of money to achieving the goals of the stated goals of those initiatives. They'll add significantly to the cost of living if they go forward unamended. So just a long list of things. Don't want to get too down into the weeds, but one other general category of things that would allow local governments to impose additional taxes and spend a lot more money on what would clearly be non-essential things. So one would be collective bargaining. If that was into play, then governments would be likely to, or some governments, local governments could enter into collective bargaining agreements with different workers, and that would, let's just say they chose to do it with teachers, that could increase budgets. I wish I had some numbers for Fairfax County, but they have just an enormous budget, and if they chose to implement collective bargaining, the cost to taxpayers would be just enormous. So those are bills that, whether you like them or not, hopefully people will agree that timing is very important. And when they were passed, no one had any real anticipation that we would be in the health and economic crisis that we're in now. So it really seems prudent to put them on hold for at least a year, and then maybe rehash them, see where we stand in a year, and decide whether or not they should go forward in what will be a distinctly different economic climate at that point in time.
Yeah, you do raise a good point that this is coming at a really bad time. I was listening on the radio into the office about the record number of unemployment, how restaurants and all these local businesses are going to be hurt for a very long time. And then you add in a lot of the fees and the taxes and just the additional financial burdens, by some of these bills. It's going to make matters worse for many of these struggling businesses to really recuperate from what they have been going through thus far in this pandemic.
Yeah.
The other thing, I want to kind of transition a little bit, that these are fiscal bills, and in the sense that, minimum wage, taxation, they all have kind of they're fiscally oriented, but there are bills that you wouldn't think of that are fiscal or financial in a sense, but are still going to have an impact on certain populations, certain communities. And so I wanted to kind of transition into this topic of, the faith community, this intersection between faith and the economy, and how a lot of our churches and nonprofits are going to be impacted by the consequences of, or the impact of, COVID-19 on our communities. Can you kind of elaborate on that a little bit? How churches and nonprofit and charitable organizations are being impacted right now, and then we can get into an issue of a bill that is before the governor, which has some very serious consequences for religious liberty, that being Senate Bill 868. But before that, just kind of set the stage for what churches and nonprofit organizations, what the impact is on them right now as well.
Well, that's a long question, Todd. Could you please repeat that?
Yeah.
Just kidding. Just kidding. It does touch on a couple of different things. So obviously these are difficult economic times, so support to charitable organizations will decrease. And unfortunately, it's at a time when the demand for a lot of the services that they provide, very often strictly through donations, will be spiking up considerably. Those demands carry over into the government. And I know the governor has talked about shifting resources to pay for the different services that are come to bear in this health crisis. But kind of making that point that I think you're leading up to here is that perhaps I could start out by saying that I think that there are many services that are so fundamentally necessary and have such a big impact to our community that the general public takes for granted, that never are not funded by taxpayer dollars. So I'll take a local organization, Tree of Life, here nearby where I live, does a great job with a food pantry and different services that strictly with donations from the community helps people in a time of need. And I think that many others throughout the state do similarly. So connecting that to one of the bills that I work closely with the Family Foundation resisting, and we tried to amend to improve, and we're not successful. So we're hoping the governor will amend, but it is a bill that, like some other initiatives this year, tried to create a special preferential class of treatment for the LGBT community, and in doing that, trying to suggest that religious organizations who would provide some of the services I'm referencing, and religious organizations would be everywhere from churches, synagogues, mosques, would be treated as public accommodations, and in doing that, subject them to the same practices that have been changed in this recent session, so that their treatment of people and hiring and firing would be the same as different organizations who have no religious component to them whatsoever. They, even in some cases, they may reflect the values of the owner. But what I'm talking about really here is religious organizations that are very much focused on have a religious mission and seek to carry out that mission as an extension of their faith in the service they provide to the community. And so treating them as other public accommodations, and then limiting their employment practices so that they do not have the discretion to hire and fire people who may not conform to the tenets of the faith of that organization, is one of the worst bills, particularly from a moral perspective, that came out of the session and is on the governor's desk. I think it was I got the two, there were companion bills, and I think it was 868, House Bill 868, if I got that right.
Senate Bill 868, and then the House Bill was 1663.
Yeah, thank you.
Yep.
So we worked back and forth, as you recall, and it was very interesting. I thought that the patrons of both bills seemed receptive to amendments, but I think the aggressive LGBT activist community wanted to downplay the concerns that are very real, and they're the ones, I think, that put on the pressure on the patrons of the bills to not accept any amendments that would have lessened some of the concerns that I raised as far as crippling religious organizations. So I think you can kind of, if you see this as a perfect storm of a budget that, when it was going into thought we were going into healthy economic times, was passed. That's changed. We have a health crisis. That's changed so many things. And now if this bill goes forward and and you cripple these religious organizations at a time when they're already strained and when their services are in a peak demand, then you've really, the government is then allowed already difficult times to be made even worse by actions of the government. And that's exactly the opposite of what we should be doing on all levels. We need to be taking the burden off businesses and families, and certainly not passing things that would impose hardship on the organizations that our communities are relying on the most.
Yeah, that's a great response to a long question. Thanks. We see this in New York with Samaritan's Purse and the challenges that they're receiving by the mayor there. That's another good example of what is likely to happen right here in Virginia if these bills are signed into law without any amendments to them.
Yep.
Well, let's speak now to some of the things that you have been trying to do in order to address this looming financial crisis here in Virginia. Can you just kind of walk us through what your suggestions have been and where you're at, and then we can kind of get into maybe, in a little bit with the governor's comments. Maybe you could comment on those about what he's going to be doing here, but just kind of get a feel for what your suggestions were.
Yeah, glad to do that, Todd. Well, first off, I'm not a budget person or an economist. Budgets are pretty complex, but I am a small business person, and through that experience, I think it's caused me to realize that if one does not anticipate a downside in time, then you have to deal with some pretty harsh circumstances. I've watched over the years many businesses that I interacted with just in rough times, they go away, and that's unfortunate. What I did is reach out to some folks that Virginia Public Policy Institute and Click Virginia and some other Middle Resolution. These are all people that are very active on different issues, but I think they represent, they're thinkers in areas of economics. And they then reached out to a couple folks that are very, very attentive to the budget and really know the ins and outs and the fine points and the mechanics of budgeting and how well reserve funds are managed, to what level they're funded, what different buckets of money exist within the Virginia government and budget that help carry us through these challenging times. And it's a very informal group, but it's amazing how much I felt we could accomplish in a very short period of time to come up with a sensible set of recommendations to pass on to the governor. So I look at them in a way that I think anybody that either plans for their household or their business look at financial things. Very simply, principles exist in your household, probably carry over into bigger businesses and the government. For example, you can't spend money that you don't have. That's pretty basic. If you're not taking it in, you shouldn't be committing to spend it somewhere. You need to be very mindful to try to cover the basics. So, food, clothing, and shelter are the basics in your household. And likewise, similar basic or essential services exist in the government. And if there's a question as to whether or not you can meet those, then you better start pulling back a little bit on non-essential spending. So it's not a great time to send. I don't want to get in trouble here. It's not a good time for my wife to send me clothes shopping for new clothes, for example, or to join a new spa or things which would be considered non-essential. They may be in good times. They may be a good place to spend your money, obviously, but a budget is impacted by the decisions that you make. And so those categories, essential, non-essential, and reserve funds and all, they exist in a family budget. They exist at the state level. So we're trying to encourage the governor to really hunker down and not just, so his announcement the other day was to take a time out and cut back on new spending. Well, that kind of scratches the surface, and that's a step in the right direction. pulling back on pay raises and hiring. Those are good steps and ones that, glad to see him making, but really need him to go much farther and cut much deeper. And at the end of the day, what is essential and non-essential, I'm sure is open to a lot of discussion, but he really has to take a position that anticipates the depth and perhaps the long duration to this economic adjustment that we're seeing. And that adjustment is a pretty mild way to refer to it. So we're encouraging him to do that, those two things, which is cut deep in the budget, only spend cut deep in essential spending, pause any non-essential spending until the money is actually there. And then the second general category we've already kind of touched on, and that is to delay any enactment of any bills, which he can do by amendment, any bills that'll increase the cost of living or doing business in Virginia. Those are the recommendations that have come out of the group, and I really appreciate the help of the folks that, again, were in that informal group that I think really distilled it down to things that the general public can understand, but hopefully will resonate with the governor. And I'm very pleased to say I see some of the that narrative kind of creeping into the things that he's saying, and certainly a lot of organizations that represent bigger groups of people. I think a law enforcement coalition spoke out yesterday against some spending. The Virginia Municipal League, which represents a lot of local governments, has sounded off and asked the governor to hold back on spending. And the Virginia Chamber of Commerce, which is a huge association of business interest, is doing likewise. So he's hearing it from different places. And again, it's up to him, I think, to step up and prepare people to make some difficult decisions that will, in the long term, be to our benefit.
Yeah, that's great. Those are great recommendations. Can you just kind of elaborate a little more on what you mean by, for those that are on the call that may not be familiar with reenactment or delaying? Can you just kind of explain that, how that would work?
Yeah, glad to, Todd. Reenactment, there's delayed enactment and reenactment that are kind of close cousins. A delayed enactment is when you usually put toward the end of a bill that you specify a date and time when it would become law. So typically bills passed in 2020 session, if signed by the governor or amended and then passed, would become law on July 1st. If there's a bill stipulates that there's a delayed enactment, it's whatever that date says. A reenactment is a little different, and that says that it would become law if it was voted on in another session. It was voted favorably by the legislature. So if the governor were to add reenactment clauses to, say, the minimum wage bill, that would mean we would, in the 2021 session, take another look at that bill and the effects it would have under whatever the economic climate is then. And if it passed the second time in 2021, then it would become law on July 1st, 2021. So it's reenactment means come back and take a look at it a second time, vote on it again, and if it passes twice, then it becomes law.
Great. That's a great explanation. Just a general question. Is there anything else you think that the governor could do, what the legislative body could do with respect to the bills? Is there anything else that you would think that could be done to make sure that families and local businesses have the relief they need during this time?
I think we've kind of covered it, Todd. It's really, we all want to be liked and be popular. Sometimes we make the mistake of wanting that to happen in the short term. I think the governor's legacy will be a legacy of success in his management of this crisis, if he's willing to make difficult decisions in the short term now that will affect the long term. So maybe I'm not sure I worded that exactly as I should, but if you'll make the tough decisions now, it's going to affect how his leadership in this crisis, the outcome will reflect favorably on him. And so, even if that means having to look face to face with the patron of a bill and they are determined that it absolutely has to pass right now, and say that for the good of the general public, we have to pause this, or that we can't appropriate the money that you'd like to get. That's hard to do. None of us want to do that, I think. But whether you're telling your kids you're going to cut their allowance in half, or if you're telling the general public we're going to delay a bill that passed, or not as much money can go to a non-essential service, I think that's what we hope to see, and that's what will make a difference. And hopefully the legislature will be thinking along the same lines. It's just not a time to be dig your heels in and say, I'm not going to give in. I'm not, my partisan project or my own personal pet project is not a place to cut. Everybody has to, I think, endure a little bit of discomfort, and we'll see. I'm not running for any higher office, so it's easier for me to say that. Huh?
Yeah, that's true. That's a great response. So much happened this session. Before we kind of get into some Q&A, because I'm sure that there's some good questions here. I just want to give you, there's a lot of different issues. A lot of things happened this session related to, it could be any topic, education or taxes or religious liberty. I just kind of want to give you a chance to give some final thoughts on the 2020 session. Even though it's not completely over yet, we still have the reconvene session coming up, which sounds like it's going to be a very interesting setting for everyone. I just want to give you a chance maybe to offer some final thoughts about the 2020 session.
Well, again, I think we've covered some of the important things, but I'll take it to a moment that will be vivid in my memory for a long time, in that when kind of confronting the I forget if it was the companion 868 or the companion 1663, which took these very aggressive actions that will play out unless the course is changed to the detriment of religious organizations, that I could turn behind me and show the folks in the chamber that the religious liberty that is so important to us, that it was etched in the wall, carved in marble behind me, just a few feet away from me, passed into law, I think 1780 something, composed by Thomas Jefferson, and so fundamental to so many things that we take for granted. So whether you're an atheist or you're a Muslim or a Christian or whatever your faith is, any faith or no faith at all, we live in a culture that benefits enormously from the values that come out of that faith. And so if you enjoy those benefits, even if you don't believe in the particular faith, it is so important that the work that you do at the Family Foundation and other organizations that contribute to that is understood and appreciated, and really becomes something that people are willing to act on. Because if it doesn't, I think we're going to see some decline in things that are very, very fundamental to the peace and the order of our culture. When it happens a little bit at a time, it's easy to miss it. But some of those efforts to undo the things that keep us preserve the order that we enjoy, we took a real hit this session and lost a lot of ground. And people need to wake up to that and understand. And so again, I commend you for your recognizing those things and helping lead people to a better understanding, and maybe even acting on protecting those things. So I'll cut it off there. Thanks for the opportunity to summarize on that.
We'll go into a period of questions and answers. And for all those that are on the call, if you have a question, I know that the instructions were at the beginning to use the chat and to submit those questions using the chat feature. We have some we're going to start off with, but let me see. This is the first time we're doing this, so I'm kind of reading these to make sure that I stay in order. How about I ask this question? We're going to talk about this COVID-19 and how are you receiving different types of briefings on this, and how have you been, sort of following this as a legislator, as a member of the House of Delegates? And can you, I know a lot of people are nervous and they're getting conflicting reports, but as far as the recommendations that are coming from the governor, can you just kind of maybe give a sense of what your feeling is on this, and maybe elaborate on that a little bit for everyone?
Sure, Todd. I am amazed that if there's a storm coming at us, it's pretty straightforward. You listen for the wind speed and the direction, and you kind of know what's ahead. This is in some ways it's the same, but in some ways it's so different. The information that is put out across the media seems so wildly differing, and that's what has really caught my attention. Some seemingly credible reports make this seem like it's maybe comparable or a little worse than the flu. Others, depending if you look at the nursing home in Virginia where 35 people have died, or in Italy or New York, it really looks extremely severe. So what we do is we're not trying to be the experts on this. The governor has daily briefings, and we try to update people. My associate here, Dan Davies, is real good at listening to those and taking away what is the new information and providing that out to constituents, handling a lot of the calls that come into our office for clarification. And then we are invited to briefings that come from the White House as well. And some of those are starting to be distinctly different. I think at the federal level, the leadership of the president is inclined to, I think, put more bearing on the possibility of collapsing our economy and wanting to take an approach to opening business so that we can deal sensibly with the virus, but do it in a way that does not have an overly detrimental effect on our economy. So again, we're not making those decisions. As I described, we're trying to influence the governor in things related to budget and finance. But the health part, that's a tougher call, isn't it?
And kind of as a follow-up to that, another question someone has is, do you anticipate the governor will call for an emergency session to deal with issues related to the pandemic, whether it's homeschooling, education, things like that? Is there any reason for him to call for a special session?
If budget numbers, which revenue numbers transition from being projections to real numbers sometime mid-year, toward the end of our fiscal year, and at that point in time, if the decline in revenue is very severe, and I think there's good reason to think that it will. If you look back at revenue declines in the 2008 to 2010 recession, they were far deeper than what the governor is anticipating now. And I think that if you look at unemployment as an indication, the change in revenue, the decline in state revenue, is likely to be far worse than the revenue decrease from in the 2008 to 2010 recession. So that said, if there's going to be a special session, it will probably come after the reality sets in when revenue numbers are before the governor, and that's when he would have to perhaps produce a revised budget to compensate for the if this ends in a week from now, they discover a cure, that may not be the case, but I don't think even the most optimistic outlook would expect that we will see a rebound in our economy that it would take to erase the likely shortfalls that we're headed for. So that said, I guess it would be mid-year. We'll we'll know better on that then.
Okay. All right, looking at some more questions. You can tell that religious liberty is one of the major issues for people who follow the Family Foundation. So Senate Bill 868, and you already touched on this, but maybe you can just reiterate what you've said. What happens if he doesn't sign the bill? And then any thoughts as to the possibility of amendments to 868? I guess if you were looking into your crystal ball on this issue.
Yeah. Well, it's hard. It's not a simple question. It's not something that if the law passes unamended, churches aren't going to have to shut down. But one other component of that bill that was just shocking was the fines that are attached to it for violations. Now, so it sort of sets a trap for businesses, or excuse me, for religious organizations. Looming over their head is this mandate from the state that they behave in a manner that's not consistent with their faith, or else be fined, charged with a violation and fined just astronomical amounts of money. I think it was $50,000 for the first offense of these new laws and $100,000 for subsequent offenses. Now that's enough, big enough fine to put even a church with deep pockets in a very difficult situation. And I think that's the intent of the bill. That it clearly is what was intended. So what would happen is if no one made a claim of discrimination that of the type that is dealt with in this bill, then nothing would happen. But this bill passed for a reason. And if you've followed this movement, which has transitioned over decades from maybe 20 years being just a leave me alone to be whatever I want to be perspective, to now being so aggressive that it's going head to head with religious organizations across the board. And this bill didn't pass just to make somebody feel good and say, I passed a piece of legislation. Whether it's today or tomorrow or the day after it passes or a week or whatever, you see it in different areas that are cases that are pending even before the Virginia Supreme Court right now. Someone will make that claim and they'll make an example of that business. And the purpose of it is to intimidate other religious organizations and make them afraid to do what they know they need to do. And that's continue to act on their faith, serving the community in a way that's consistent with their faith. And so the timeline is difficult to project, but I believe completely, without any doubt, that's the game plan that the aggressive, radical LGBT community has. And that doesn't include everyone. I mean, I've met and communicated with people who just aren't part of that. They would say they're part of the community, but this is the radical element that just wants to is not happy until the culture says that what you do is okay. And because many of us believe otherwise, we just can't say that and can't treat it like it's okay.
Great answer. Yeah, that might be the last one we take on 868 because that was just a great answer. Going back to sort of the budget, someone asked about the rainy day fund. If you think that this is going to be used for the current crisis we find ourselves in, and what your thoughts are on that.
Again, I'm not a budget guy, so I'll do my best, Todd. But there are two funds. One is a cash reserve fund, and I've got some numbers in front of me, but I don't have my glasses on. So let's see. Well, I'll just speak generally to them. The rainy day fund has specific limits as to how much can be spent in any budget cycle. The combination of those two funds is quite a bit less than $2 billion, which Secretary of Finance Lane is projecting. So no doubt some of that money will be used if it's needed. The important thing to take away, though, is that their own projections would indicate that if there's a severe revenue shortfall, that those funds will be depleted and So hypothetically, half of the rainy day fund could be used in fiscal year 2020, and then after mid-year, when we enter into the next fiscal year, the other half of that fund could be used. And so we could work our way through our reserves pretty quickly if the revenue is shortfall is there. So we do have cushions, and that's good. Unfortunately they're funded far less at a level far less than what they could be funded. So we're not in an ideal footing there, going into a pretty serious financial crisis. We have some of that stuff on our website. Can I give you the name of the website, Todd, in case somebody wants to?
Absolutely, go ahead.
Yeah, so it's vote.larock.us, and we have links to a couple different things, a list of bills that we're asking the governor to reconsider, a set of really great recommendations from a very astute budget person that would apply to this immediate crisis. And they're very good recommendations, a very simple outline to read even for somebody that doesn't have a background in finance, and just a budget in general if you want to browse the budget. One item that strikes me, and don't mean to pick on anybody, but if you take the 4 biggest universities in Virginia, I think we've got about $6 billion appropriated to go to those 4 colleges alone, and in each of the next 2 years, budget years. So, I think that's a lot of money. So I'll just cut it off there. But in the rough order of magnitude of this where we are now, where we need to look for money, that's the kind of spending that might have to be decided on whether it's essential or non-essential. And, I'll stop short of saying what my vote would be.
Yeah.
But thanks for that. The website is votelarock.us. Thank you.
Gotcha. And so just so everyone knows that website has been posted in the chat. So if they go to chat, they can find a link to that website. Let's see. Have we got time for maybe one more question? Let's see. There's been a lot of questions here on elections.
Thanks for opening us in prayer there, Victoria. That takes so much comfort in being reminded that we don't have to be heavy-hearted about all this. And your prayer was a good reminder of that. Really is. I'm waiting for you though, Todd.
Yeah. How about this? We'll kind of end on, there've been a lot of questions about elections, but I kind of want to get your thoughts on sort of moving some of these dates around. Are we, when we're talking about like the general election in November 3rd, I mean, are we getting a little ahead of ourselves on some of these dates and trying to predict, trying to move them around? Are we? So I'm trying.
We've gotten a lot of input from people who, understand the circumstances and the need to take a different approach to elections, Todd. But I think we're pretty close to some local elections, and the idea of moving local elections and primaries to November would really upset things in a big way. We do have absentee voting mechanisms in place, and I think there are some questions I've seen from registrars whether or not. I think the law is clear that a special election can't overlap with the general election. I'm not sure if a primary can overlap with the general election. When I say a general, I'm talking about a general local election. But we may have to make some adjustments to the law on this reconvene day if the governor proposes them. But I really think that the idea of pushing local elections and primaries out to the November, that's something our minority leader, Delegate Gilbert, has already penned a letter to the governor asking him to make an exception and not take that action. So I think there'll be a lot of support for that position to avoid moving primaries and local elections to November. But
yeah,
we'll see how that shakes out.
I do. So I think this has been great. You've provided some really good information, and I think that going forward, you have highlighted the fact that the governor and the legislature has some really important decisions to make as we move forward. And we appreciate your leadership on this and highlighting areas in which they making recommendations to try and protect families, protect local businesses. So we really do appreciate all the work that you're doing. And that's going to end it with the Q&A. And so what we'll do is hand it back to Victoria, and she's going to go ahead and close this out.
Well, thank you so much, Delegate LaRock. We are just honored to have your time and your expertise. I'm always amazed that legislators are kind of expected to be experts on everything, and I can't imagine how challenging it is to track just all the bills and the budget situation and the changes with the pandemic and just all of it. So we really do appreciate it very much. And
couldn't do it without you, Victoria. Sorry to jump in. Couldn't do it without you.
Absolutely. Well, we're glad to help. And we did experience our take on the session was very much that it felt like a free-for-all spending zone. We had new party in power and lots of things they wanted to accomplish. And so it's particularly glaring to go from great economic times and a party that made a lot of plans to spend a lot of money to this moment that we're in. And we appreciate particularly your leadership in trying to navigate us back out of one, what was absurd spending in the first place, and two, what in any situation like this we'd have to pare down. So truly grateful. I want to remind folks on the religious freedom bill that's been talked about, 868, and the House corollary, we are still sending one more round of petition names to the governor today. So if you have not signed that petition, that is going to be placed in the chat. I already see it going there, the link. So if your name is not on that, we'd love to add it with this last round. We've already sent thousands because we didn't know when he'd sign it. So the goal was send some names, send more if you have to, if he hasn't already done anything with the bill. We're pleased so far that he hasn't signed it. If not for the pandemic, we were certainly concerned there'd be an early signing, not enough time to really push for amendments. So we've at least had the full window. We've had lots of input going into him, everything from signature names on a petition to a bunch of African-American clergy that we think he'd be particularly willing to listen to. So there's been a lot of rounds with him. So just be prayerful over the next couple of days. He has till Sunday night to take action. Well, I guess it's Saturday. Let me see. It's Saturday night to take action. And we'll just kind of continue to pray over that. I am excited to announce that this is intended to be a weekly thing. We'll get better and better with the format and the hosting. Hopefully folks are getting comfortable with the way it works. Hopefully folks figured out that you can change your view at the top of the screen from seeing everybody to seeing the people that are talking. Hopefully people are figuring out that you can chat direct to the administrator to send your question in instead of sending it to everybody. So those are little quirks. We're working through platforms, we're working through format, but we're excited. Next week, we're going to be bringing to you Senator Steve Newman, gets a Senate perspective, also very knowledgeable on the budget. He has been involved in that process literally for decades. He is one of our senators with great seniority. So he's seen round after round. He's seen different parties in power. He's been deeply part of times where we've had a governor doing the budgeting with us, times where we've had opponent governors. So we're looking forward to just kind of hearing his take just on session in general, and specifically as we head into reconvene. We will at that point know what has happened to all the bills. So that's the exciting part about that, is he will be able to weigh in on what the governor has changed, amended, signed, and so forth. So it'll sort of be a great prep as we head towards veto session when we're asking the legislature to react to the governor's changes. So with that, I'm going to say thank you. I saw many friends on here today. We had well over 100 people engaged with us in this process, and I suspect as folks find out on the weekly basis, this will grow. So thank you to Delegate LaRock, thank you to Todd, and at this point we'll go ahead and sign out. Thanks everyone for being here.